Shalom, and thank you for inquiring about our Abraham Promise Fund and your complementary will or trust. Some have called this legacy planning or multi-generational giving. I've even heard it called creative stewardship. Whatever you want to call it, when a partner of this ministry prearranges a gift or bequest in support of the many outreaches of Jewish Voice, it has a powerful and lasting impact on countless lives. It also helps ensure that the crucial work that God has called us to continues even through uncertain times that may be ahead. It's true and encouraging. Your thoughtful long-range planning can continue to bless the Jewish people and help introduce them to their Messiah long into the future. It also helps you achieve your personal financial goals. The following estate planning seminar is designed to educate you on how to structure your estate plan in order to maximize the benefits for the kingdom of God as well as for your family. We're honored to be partnering with the Financial Planning Ministry to give you this gift. There's no out-of-pocket expense for this program. We only ask that you prayerfully consider including Jewish Voice in your estate plan. Together we can transform lives and see all Israel saved. Please enjoy the seminar and follow the instructions at the end to complete your will or trust. God bless you.
Well, good afternoon. It is a true pleasure to be with you today. I can't tell you how excited I am to share a little bit about estate planning with you today. And so I just want to welcome you to what I like to call Estate Planning 101, okay? I know that there were probably a few other things that you could have been doing today. A few here in this area that you could have been doing. You could have been playing golf. You could have gone to a spring training game. You could have washed the dog. You could have had a root canal, all of which might have been more preferable to some people than listening to a presentation on estate planning. But I do want to commend you for being here, and I do think that at the end of our time together today, that you will walk out of here knowing that this did have some value and that you learned a few things. So with that, I would just tell you that that really is my only goal. That when you walk out of here this afternoon, that you will have learned a little bit more about this whole area of what it is to have a will or a trust in an estate plan. So again, put your defenses down. There's no reason to put any rocks or rotten tomatoes that you brought along to throw at the speaker down, because let me just tell you, I have nothing to sell, okay? That should put you at ease. I'm not here to sell you anything. This is informational only today, okay? So that again, when you walk out, you will know a little bit more about this whole topic and what it means to you. So again, my name is Paul Ledbetter. And I, like you, don't necessarily think that this topic is the most exciting or sexy topic in the world, okay? Truth be told, it can be a little dry, all right? But I'm going to try my best to bring it to life a little bit, simplify it a little bit, and make it so that we can all walk out with a little better understanding. I first realized kind of the importance of this area as I served as a stewardship director for a large church here in the Phoenix area for a number of years. And it was during that time that I really came to understand the importance of this topic and the fact that many people never get around to doing this. A little bit more about me before we get into our presentation. I know you probably don't care, but just humor me for a minute, okay? I'll give you a little bit about my background and how I got here today. I grew up in a small Midwestern town, farm country in north central Illinois. Went to a small Midwestern college, Wheaton College, if anybody knows Wheaton College. Shout out for Wheaton. And then after that, I really thought that I was going to go into teaching. I had prepared to teach high school, American government, and American history, and economics. I know that was probably three of your favorites when you were 17. No, that is a joke, yes. No, it's not very exciting as well. But I did go ahead and I did that for a year right out of college. But I have to tell you that I quickly determined that it was not my favorite thing to do, standing in a room all day long saying the same thing 5 times a day to people who really didn't want to hear it. So I left teaching behind and I gravitated into the sales world. I ended up in the area of insurance sales, specifically employee benefit plans. And I would spend the next 24 years in that arena, quite frankly. But back in 2014, after some growing, just questioning in my life, some discontent over purpose, meaning, is this really what I want to be doing long term? I really felt a call to ministry. And it was at that time that the church that I was attending was opening up a new position for a stewardship pastor or stewardship director. And so I took that leap of faith because, as you can imagine, ministry dollars aren't quite the same as corporate world dollars, okay? But we took that leap of faith, my wife and I and our family, and it was a great move. And it was during that time that I really came in contact with this ministry, financial planning ministry, okay? The church that I was attending had a number of different educational resources that we provided to our members and our regular attenders in the area of personal finance, responsibility, how to get on a budget, how to save for the future, all those important topics that we all know of. But I always question, how are we helping people long term with their resources? And they introduced me to a partner that that church had been partnering with for over 20 years, and that is financial planning ministry. It's really kind of a misnomer. A lot of people think when they hear this, that financial planning ministry, that we help people with their stock portfolios or their mutual funds. We don't do that, okay? It really should have probably been called estate planning ministry, but maybe that name was taken. I'm not sure. They didn't consult me. But it was, again, during my time as a stewardship director that I really fell in love with the vision and the mission of financial planning ministry, which is really just to come alongside ministry partner organizations, whether it's churches or parachurch ministries or Jewish Voice. And again, it's just a wonderful partnership where we're able to help them help their donors and regular attenders with this whole area of estate planning, and also introduce them to an idea about how they might be able to use it for financial giving as well. Let me give you a little stat here, okay? I really dug deep for this. I want to share it with you. The mortality rate here in Maricopa County continues to be 100%. It's the same everywhere I've been to give this presentation. How ironic. No, of course it is. But does anyone want to take a guess of the U.S. population, how many of us never get around to any type of estate planning? Meaning that we will die without anything in place relative to the resources that we're leaving behind. Anybody have any guesses? 95%. You're a real pessimist on human nature. Okay, yeah. How many don't get around to doing this? 95% is our first answer.
40.
40, okay.
75.
All right, well, that's pretty close there. It's actually about 67%, depending on what poll you look at, of the U.S. population will die without any plan in place whatsoever. So again, that's a little troublesome. And why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose we never get around to doing this? Any ideas?
We're not going to die then.
Yeah, we think we're never going to die, or at least not in the near future. Perhaps it's something I will get to someday, right? Yeah, that's a good one. What else?
I think it's complicated or expensive.
Yes, very good. Yeah, we think it's going to be overly complicated, and also, to add to that, really expensive, because we're probably going to have to get some other people involved in this, is what we think, right? And who do we think those people are going to be? Lawyers. Now, no offense to lawyers. There's a reason for lawyers. They have a job to do. But I think we all know that lawyers sometimes can be expensive, and they charge by the hour, and so there could be a lot of expense associated with these documents that we hear so much about in estate plannings. What else? Anything else? Yeah.
Our estate is too small.
Yeah, we think I really don't have all that much, so I don't think my estate really warrants a whole lot of estate planning per se. Yeah, that's a really good one. Anybody else? Any other ideas? Yeah.
Oh, it kind of makes you think of your end time, of your death. And
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
you wanna think
It
about
reminds us of our own mortality. Okay? And some would say it's a little bit morbid almost to sit down and talk about my death. Well, you know, it's kind of funny. I heard a story once that kind of illustrated that. And it happened to be about a couple of golfers. And these two guys played golf together every week, okay? And they got to the 18th hole, and is always customary there. They looked over, and there's a cemetery that runs right along the 18th hole. And so they happened to glance over, and sure enough, there was a funeral service going on there in the cemetery that day. And the one guy, as he was getting ready to tee off, he actually stopped for a second. He took off his hat and put it over his heart, and he said a little prayer. And the other guy was really taken aback by that. He was kind of impressed, quite frankly. But he didn't say anything. They went ahead and played the hole. They got to the end of the hole there on the green, and it is customary. They took off their hats to shake hands. And when they did that, the one that was so impressed said to the other guy, "Hey, I noticed what you did there on the tee, and you know, that was really touching to me. I really thought that was very sensitive." And the other guy said, "Well, I thought it was the least I could do. We were married for 48 years. So again, people don't like the topic of death in general. Their own is even worse than talking about someone else's, obviously. So estate planning can be a little bit sensitive and something that we don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on. So you've all given me great answers. Again, expensive, complicated, it's a little bit morbid or difficult to think about our own mortality. But all that to say, I think a lot of it comes down to this procrastination thing, that we just put it off for the future. But also, we're just so busy today. It's just one more thing on our plate, and it's just tough to get to. I mean, we forget to do some of the little things in life sometimes, notwithstanding the big things. Okay? And so I saw a picture once that kind of illustrated this, and I'll share it with you. That just shows that sometimes we forget to do the little things in life, okay? Like if you could see this, this guy, he drove away with the gas nozzle still attached to his car. So, and when I first saw this, I thought, well, that's kind of a funny picture, and yes, it illustrates our point, but how often do you think that could really happen? Well, thank goodness for Google, because we can find things out like that today. Did you know that? So I Googled this. Do you know how often people do this? On an annual basis here in the U.S., this happens 4,000 times a year, okay? So again, a lot of people with a lot on their mind, it's easy to get a little absent-minded at times. I further thought that it was still a little bit over the top and probably didn't reflect an accurate portrayal of how often that happens. And then last summer, my 21-year-old son did it. So again, it happens, and he had a lot on his mind as well. Luckily, these things are built to do that today, so you can see it just tears away and there's relatively little harm. But all that notwithstanding, these are all real reasons that we've talked about why people avoid this process or the topic of estate planning. Well, again, as you remember, the purpose of tonight is to just, or this afternoon, is just to give you information. Okay? When you walk out of here, I want you to be able to make some decisions on if, when, how you can take care of these things when that time comes that you decide to address them. And we're going to try and make it really easy for you to do that. Okay? So I'd like you to follow along with me. You should have an outline there along with a planning guide. And so feel free to follow along and fill out the notes as we go. I'll try to make sure that we get all of them covered. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, we all have three options to choose from when planning your estate. And for the record, you will choose one of them, okay? Either actively or passively, okay? So let's take a little bit of time and just look at those three options. The first one is something called intestate succession, okay? Now, I know that sounds kind of like some sort of a gastrointestinal disorder, and it may cause that if you were to leave your heirs in this position. So with that as a hint, can you guess what that means, intestate succession? Yes, sir.
The state takes over.
Okay, the state takes over because you did nothing. You died with no will in place. That's what intestate succession means. And again, this happens more often than we think. And it doesn't just happen to what I'll call common folk like me, who, again, as some of you said, I don't feel like I have a whole lot of estate or resources, assets. But this happens all the time, believe it or not, to even well-known people, like movie stars and rock stars and film stars. recently, well, about a year and a half ago, you may remember that there was a certain pop star who died. Does anybody know who I'm referring to? Yeah, Prince. Prince died intestate succession, meaning he had no will or trust in place whatsoever. And what happens at that point, you all know probably, cousins and aunts and uncles come out of the woodwork that you never knew you even had. Okay? No, it gets contested sometimes because people try to determine and discern where everything should go and who should have the rights to what was left in the estate. So we don't recommend this. It is not a good way to go, but again, it simply means that you're dying with no will. Second option, something called a last will and testament. You're familiar with that. Okay, we've all heard of this. In fact, maybe you've watched TV shows or movies where somebody is on their last breath, their deathbed, and they ask for a piece of paper and they just scrawl out that they're leaving their last will and testament, and I'm leaving everything to so-and-so. And again, that's perfectly legal, actually, in 26 states. Okay? In fact, even here in Arizona, that's perfectly legal to just use what is called a holographic will. And the term there, holographic, it's not like some sci-fi thing. It's not hologram. It's holographic, which just means handwritten. Okay? It's a handwritten will, perfectly legal in 26 states. Can you think of any problems that could come up with this type of a document? Anybody?
Unable to read it.
Okay, it might be illegible, unable to be read. Yeah? All right. What else?
You may not be able to find out where you have it, your heirs.
Okay, may not be able to find where the heirs are at. Okay.
Would it have to be a legal document? That they have?
Again, just handwritten makes it a legal document, actually, in certain states. So that's not really the issue. Can you think of any other issues? Yeah.
Maybe incomplete?
Might be incomplete. All right. Not very thorough. Yeah, one more.
Family could contest they weren't in the right mind.
Yeah, maybe they could contest whether or not they were in their right mind, whether they had capability to make the decisions that they're putting down in writing here. But I usually get one other one here. You guys are all squeaky clean.
Somebody could add to it.
Oh, yeah, somebody could add to it. What do we call that? Forgery or fraud, yeah, in general. And that certainly is an issue when it comes to this area of last will and testament. If it's simply just a handwritten chicken scratch on paper, well, that could be subject to fraud. And so there are probably better ways that we could do this. And again, not every state allows this. So maybe there's another way we could do that. Hey, why don't we just add a couple witnesses? A couple witnesses of age, over age 18, that could solve that problem. And yes, it does in those other remaining states. I believe that puts it perfectly legal that it can act in the fashion it's designed to. So end of story, end of problem, right? Well, wait a minute. Can you think of any problems that might occur there? Yeah, maybe. People could predecease you, something like that. All right. Any other issues there with a witnessed will? Again, you guys are just too squeaky clean. They could lie. Yeah, I think if I went out on the street today, I could probably pay a couple guys $100 a piece to be witnesses on this document that I'm holding, which may or may not really be my actual will. Okay? So there still is opportunity here for fraud or deceit, and there might be a better way to do this. Okay? All right. The other thing that I see with last will and testaments is that they often can be outdated. Some time ago, I met with an older couple, and they were actually going through the process of filling out their planning guide and wanted us to do a trust for them. And so as I sat down with them, they let me know right up front, it's been a little while since we looked at this. And I said, oh, okay. How long has it been? And they said, 35 years. So obviously, the will that they showed me, which they thought they had done before, was outdated. And it didn't reflect an accurate snapshot of what their life looked like today. And so we see that that can be another issue as well. People do a will, and then they put it in a file cabinet or a closet, and they don't look at it again for a very long time. And so often it really doesn't reflect their wishes even at the time that they do pass away. So again, probably would not be our recommendation there either. Well, let's see if there's a third option. This brings us to this whole area of trusts. Now, I'm often curious what your first reaction is, just word association, when you hear the word trusts. Give me some insight here.
Complicated.
Complicated, all right, interesting.
You have too many things.
I have too many things maybe, okay. But your very first inclination when you hear trust. Mistrust, okay, that could be. I had a different reaction. When I first heard trust, when I was introduced to this whole area, I thought, that's for rich people, okay? That's like for the really rich. And I'm not going to mention names or anything like Rockefeller or Trump or, no, again, I didn't say that. But again, trusts sometimes get a bad rap because we think that you have to have lots of resources, like millions, billions of dollars. And I'm here to tell you today, and I hope that you learn today, that that's not true. Okay? They are not just for rich people. There are a lot of functions and reasons to perhaps look into this, even if you don't have millions of dollars. Okay? Now, there are a couple different kinds of trusts, and I want to point these out to you. The first one is what's called an irrevocable trust. Okay? And what do you suppose the key characteristic of that type of trust is? It's irrevocable, which means it can't be changed, okay? It is bound in stone, so to speak, from the time that it is executed. So yes, it is not very flexible as a vehicle for estate planning. However, still useful if you know that that's what you want to do. Now, what happens here is that often these types of trusts are used by charitable organizations. In fact, some of the Ivy League schools have been using irrevocable trusts for many years. Charitable remainder trusts, where people are able to actually give a gift, and they give it as such that they receive a tax deduction in the year that they give it. Many times, they might even purchase an annuity type of settlement where they receive income even on a monthly basis for as long as they live, could even go into a spouse's longevity as well. But then when both are passed and both of those trustees are gone, then the remainder, per its name, remainder trust, goes to the institution. And so a lot of those Ivy League schools have built up literally millions of dollars in their endowment funds on these charitable remainder trusts, which are irrevocable, okay? But again, the key thing that I want you to know about that is, yes, you can't change it, and even more so, you lose control of the assets at that point, okay? So you've given the gift, whatever the case may be, but you no longer have control over those assets, okay? So it's just important to know that that's how that works. Now, another key part of trusts would be in the area of revocable living trusts. And this is an area we're going to talk a little bit more on and really focus on this afternoon. So sometimes you'll hear the initials even, RLT, that's a revocable living trust. And again, these are very useful because, again, key characteristic here, revocable meaning what? You can change it. It's very flexible as a vehicle for estate planning. You can change it and or cancel or revoke it even at any time if it doesn't pertain to what your life looks like at that point anymore. All right, so this is by far the most popular type. You retain full control of this as the trustee of the account, okay? So irrevocable, revocable, we're really going to focus now for the next few minutes on revocable living trusts, okay? So which of these three options that we've talked about today do you suppose would be subject to the process of probate? Now, that word just sends a shiver through my spine sometimes. Probate, it just sounds like an ominous word. It is really the proving of a will or the process by which states require you to go through if you have no proper document in place to keep you from having to go through probate, okay? Now, I almost gave you the answer there. I caught myself because I'm going to have a little quiz in just a second. But again, which of the above? Let's talk about the first one. Intestate succession, you die with no will. Do you think you're going to have to go through probate? Yes, absolutely. How about the last will and testament? You think that's going to require probate?
Yes.
Well, this is a little trickier, isn't it? But you're right. It still requires probate. Now, there's a little asterisk here, which I point out to let you know that there is perhaps an exception to this. And that is, if you do have a very small estate, you can actually skip the probate process and just have a small estate affidavit completed, okay? And that would be, depending on the state, below the certain thresholds. We'll come back to that. But yes, there is a way to avoid probate with just a will if you have a small amount of assets, okay? What about this area of trusts? Probate? No, yes, you are correct. It's kind of intuitive here. I kind of led you there. But this area of trust does not require probate. It is a very key advantage of this type of vehicle, all right? So how big do you suppose your estate has to be to avoid probate? Now again, keep in mind, probate is done on a state-by-state basis. So each state, it's a little bit different. But since we're here in Arizona today, what do you suppose the threshold here in Arizona is to require probate? Any guesses? If you have more than $75,000 in personal assets, you will have to go through probate if you don't have a trust, okay? Now, there are also a few other caveats and ways through that. People always want to point out, well, can I do a beneficiary deed on property? You can. That can work as well. And so we're not going to focus on that today, but that can work as well. But here in Arizona, it's $75,000. In California, you can see that it's $150,000. In Nevada, it's $25,000. And in Georgia, they would like everybody to have the excitement of going through the process of probate, okay? So if you have a single dollar to your name in Georgia, you're going to have to go through probate if you don't have the right estate plan in place. All right. Now, there is a secondary limit or threshold for not only just personal property, but real estate, okay? So here in Arizona, it's $75,000 of personal property and $100,000 of real estate, okay? So there's two different thresholds. In California, it's $150,000 of personal property and $50,000 of real estate. Does that strike anybody else as funny? Because every time I see that, I have to chuckle a little bit because I don't think there's any real estate in California that's less than 50. I don't think a tool shed is less than 50,000 in California. So anyway, I found that amusing. But again, we even give you the state revenue statute here in case you don't believe us here. But it looks like this. And you can go on to the Arizona State Legislature and find out for yourself. If you suffer from insomnia or something, this is a great cure. Click on Here at Night and read through the state revenue statutes. But you will find at the bottom there that the exceeding $75,000 does require probate. Okay? All right, moving on. Why is this such a big deal? Why is it so important to avoid probate? Well, I'm glad you asked. First of all, it's expensive. Okay? Well, how much is it? Well, it depends. Again, state by state, sometimes has different percentages. It's usually on a graded scale, but we're showing you a typical scale here would be 8% on the first 200,000, and then 7% on the next 500,000, and then 6% perhaps on anything over $1 million. So you can see that adds up in a hurry. And again, for me, this is a little disheartening because if I think about the time when it comes that I pass away and move on to my eternal home, my heirs are going to be left with having to deal with this. And I would certainly hate to see these types of fees being paid to states and attorneys and everything else. No offense to any of them. They all deserve to get what they need. But this is unnecessary. I don't want my assets to necessarily be going to just pay fees. I'd rather they go to ministry. I'd still want to include my kids in my in my plans, obviously, and leave them something. But I can think of lots of other things as someone committed to ministry that this may be an opportunity where I could funnel some money to some of the ministries that meant so much to me during my lifetime. We'll come back to that in a little bit later. All right, it's expensive. Again, I can think of a lot better places to put your money than paying those fees. It also takes time, okay? I just saw this. It's actually longer than this now in many places, including Arizona. Generally speaking, to go through the entire probate process, it is over a year at a minimum. But in some places, maybe it's still 9 months. We include that. 9 months to 2 years is going to be part of the process. Why is that such a big deal? Well, first of all, it's just going to require perhaps a lot of travel. If your heirs or your people who are named in the trust have to come from other places, it's going to require a lot of extra planning. So again, it just takes time that you don't need it to, okay? Along with that, because it takes time, this comes into play. You have no control over the assets. They're frozen during probate. So if you have perhaps some real estate in there, perhaps a house or two, and it needs maintenance, needs to be repainted, or a new roof, whatever the case may be, you're not going to be able to use estate assets to take care of that. So the beneficiaries or heirs are going to probably have to come out of their own pocket first to pay for those things and then hope to get reimbursed when the estate is settled. Okay? So again, you lose control there. You also have no privacy. Okay? Your will becomes public record after your death if you are just going through the will and then probate process. Now again, is that a big deal? Maybe for some. For me, it's not really. I'm not trying to hide anything, but at the same time, I really don't want the world to know and other people to know how much I had and who I gave it to. So I'd rather keep this a private matter between just me and my family. This, in fact, is a glaring issue in the fact that I mentioned earlier. You can Google almost anything and find all about people's wills and people who died intestate succession, and you can see exactly what the assets were and where it went. You also can see how long it took. In fact, just Google that when you get home tonight and see, just Google estates or stars who died with no will in place or intestate succession. You'll find stories of Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, a famous rock guitarist. They all died intestate succession. Another famous one is John Wayne. Okay? John Wayne died back in, I think it was like 1979, but his kids got in a feud about part of the trust, and it didn't get settled until 2010. Okay? So just, again, all that to be indicative of the fact you don't want to go through this process. Okay? And again, we'll take a little quick review in a minute, but I'm here to tell you, you have a choice. You don't have to go through probate. Okay? First of all, we talked about the fact if you have a will, sorry, you're going to have to go through the probate process. But a living trust, what do you think? You've caught on. No probate. Okay? That's the key advantage here. The other advantages of the revocable living trust we talked about earlier, it avoids probate. It's often less expensive for your heirs, your beneficiaries, because they're not having to pay those fees that we talked about. It eliminates lengthy delays, that 9 months to 2 years. In fact, back to this for a second. I recently talked to a friend of mine who works at the Arizona State House, the House of Representatives down there, and it's right next door to the appellate courts and the courts down there that deal with probate. Do you know how many probate judges there are in Maricopa County? Now keep in mind, Maricopa County now is, I think, back up about 5 million people in Maricopa County. So, just law of large numbers. Statistically speaking, there are a pretty good amount that die on a daily basis. All right? So the overload, you can imagine, can get pretty high pretty quickly. Do you know how many judges are handling probate? 2. Okay? So all that to say, you can understand how that process can get drawn out with all the delays and continuances that are often a part of the court process. So you don't have to do that. You can eliminate lengthy delays. Again, we talked about the fact that you can preserve your privacy. No one else needs to know about your estate. Remember, it's completely flexible. The revocable living trust can be changed or canceled at any time. It avoids the problems of joint ownership. Now, this is one where I like to spend a couple minutes again, because where you'll see this, I was talking with someone not long ago. It was an older gentleman, actually, who was getting ready to buy a new piece of property. And I believe he was close to 75 years old, and his intent in buying the property was that he would live there for the remainder of his life, but then he would leave it to his daughter, okay? And so in order to do that, his thought was that he would just put her on the title from the start, okay? Which you can do, that's fine, but it was pointed out to me that there can be problems with that, okay? And let me just tell you about one scenario that could happen. Now again, in estate planning, it's one of our things we do. We think up kind of crazy contingencies, situations that could happen. And we all know that sometimes crazy does happen, okay? So this may be a little crazy, but let's just say that his daughter, who's now on title with him, hypothetically speaking, is driving to work one day, and let's say she drives a very busy freeway, like I-17 right out here. I had the privilege of doing that for a couple years every day. It's not fun. In fact, it often gets so backed up that it becomes a literal parking lot at times, and you're just sitting. Now, unfortunately, in today's age, we have technology at our hands all the time, and you've seen it as well as I have. So, you know, it's easy to feel that urge, that temptation to pick up that phone and start checking emails or start texting. So let's say, back to our story, that this gentleman's daughter picks up her phone and starts texting. And then she sees that traffic's going and she takes off. Well, let's just say she causes an accident, okay? And unfortunately, it's a big accident. And somebody dies in the accident, okay? Well, not only is she perhaps going to get a ticket when they trace the timestamp on her phone to the email or the text at the time of the accident, but what else is going to happen? There's a lawsuit coming. You can bet on it, okay? And again, anything that she owns is going to be in threat of being encumbered with that lawsuit, including the property that her dad put her on, okay? Now, it's admirable that her dad wants to do that and put her on the property, but there's a better way to do that. Use a living trust. Name her as a beneficiary. It passes to her at his death, and she'll also pick up some tax advantages in that she'll get what's called a step-up in basis, which for accounting purposes means that she's going to now not have to pay on the gains that were appreciated, hopefully, in that property, but just on what the value is at the time that she took it over, okay? So again, an advantage there, but again, it fulfills the desire that this person would have had without the liability that it also came with, okay? So just a point of reference there on the problem of joint ownership. It can be avoided by using a living trust. It gives you the opportunity to appoint guardians for minor children, okay? Now, truth be told, we can do this with a will or a trust, okay? And just so you know, again, financial planning ministry, we're not here to sell anything, okay? And we're not here only doing trusts, although we think in many cases it is the most popular and best vehicle. But we'll also do a will if that's better for somebody and it fits in their resource capabilities of what they have as far as assets. But again, with a trust or a will, you're going to be able to appoint your minor children. Again, why is that important? Heaven forbid that you have that time when you pass away, perhaps with your spouse in a mutual accident, and leave small children with no one named to be their guardian. Now, truth be told, the courts do a pretty good job in this area. They are trying to make sure that the kids are placed with the best option, whether that's a grandparent or aunts or uncles, whatever the case may be. But again, it can be avoided. Why not make sure that those children are going to live with the people that you want them to be with, that most accurately perhaps reflect the values and the way you would have raised them. You can do that by appointing guardianship, okay? You also get to name a conservator, which is kind of like an adult guardian, all right? Or a guardian for adults. As we get older, there may come a time where we're no longer able to make decisions for ourselves. And at that point, we'll need to have someone who can make decisions for us. In the estate planning world, trusts in particular, that's called a conservator, okay? You get to do that. You can name that again, either in a living trust or in a will. Using the revocable living trust, it will also make for a quick distribution of assets when the time does come that the trustees of the trust have passed away, okay? Usually, it can be as little as 4 to 6 weeks if everything's in place and it's pretty simple. Now, sometimes if there's a sale of property, it could take longer than that. But generally speaking, using the revocable living trust does make for a quick distribution of assets. It also allows for a provision called an AB marital trust that can be incorporated into your revocable living trust. This can reduce or eliminate federal estate tax. Now, with that said, let me point out that, first of all, trusts were never intended to help people avoid paying taxes. That was never the intent. However, as the IRS does allow in their tax code, there are some provisions that can make it advantageous to have this type of a trust, and to include the AB marital trust provision. What does that mean? Well, first of all, let's talk about the bigger issue, which is how big does your estate have to be for you to be subject to federal estate tax? Back in 1994 through 99, it was $600,000. You can see the progression up to $1 million in 2002, 2003, up to $2 million in 06, 08, all the way up to in 17, last year, it was $5,490,000. What happened this year? Does anybody remember? Yeah, Congress passed a new tax bill. Remember that? Well, part of that tax bill was that now the exemption goes all the way to $11,200,000, okay, as a result of the new tax bill. They actually tried to get rid of it altogether. And actually, there's been precedence for that. You can see back in 2010, well, again, first of all, as you know, this is a political football. It gets debated in Congress, okay? And I know it's shocking to believe, but sometimes the people in Congress, they don't always agree. I know, it's shocking. But as it was that year, they actually argued about this right down to the wire to the point that they let it expire in 2010. And there was actually no estate tax whatsoever in 2010. Well, of course, there's a story to this, so I wouldn't be sharing this. Do you know who died in 2010? Lots of people I know. But there was a famous sports mogul who died in 2010. Does anybody know who that was? Does anybody watch Seinfeld? That's a clue. Steinbrenner, yes. George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, died in 2010 with billions of dollars in his estate, and the U.S. government didn't get a dime because that had been allowed to expire and there was no estate tax that year. So again, you could argue now it's so high that it limits just to a very small population as to who's going to be applicable to that. But you can see that at some points, there are people that make that much money and have that much money put away. And so to them, it could be valuable to be able to double that exemption, which is what an AB marital trust does. First of all, here's the importance, because if you do go over the limit, the tax rate is 40%, okay? So if you had $15 million, let's say, you'd be paying a 40% tax rate on the difference between $11,200,000 and $15 million, okay? Well, using a marital AB trust, you actually, as husband and wife, can get a second exemption, which doubles it. So you now, in today's day and age, 2018, can go all the way to $22,400,000 without any federal estate tax, okay? So obviously you can see now that was a pretty major thing that was in that bill, and it will have an effect on certain people. All right, so how does a living trust work? Well, First, we create the trust, which is the document, all right? Second, we have to name the trustee. Who do you suppose you're going to name as trustee? You name yourself as the trustee of your trust. And if you're husband and wife, then both of you would be named as trustees in the living trust. You're going to remember, name your conservator and your successor trustee. Okay? Now, sometimes in a will, you'll hear a different term there used, which is executor. Okay? Successor trustee is the person who, at the time when both of the trustees, or the trustee if it's a single person, has passed away, then the trust kicks into gear. Okay? This is when it actually comes alive. And the successor trustee is charged with the responsibilities at that time of taking inventory of all the resources and assets, paying off all debts and liabilities, and then making sure that all gets distributed to these said beneficiaries who were named in the trust. Okay? So it's a pretty big job, all right? Not overly complicated. You don't have to be a financial genius or guru, but I do counsel people to think about this really intently. Okay? You definitely need to put some time into thinking through who would be the best successor trustee for our trust or your trust. And it needs to be somebody who's relatively detail-oriented, can work to get things done in a proactive way. But again, they don't have to be a financial genius by any means, but somebody who you can count on is going to see the process through. That's the biggest issue. They can find help with a lot of the issues, but they have to be proactive enough to make sure that it's all going to get done. Remember, you'll also name a guardian for your minor children. Again, that doesn't necessarily have to be the same person as the successor trustee. It sometimes is, but many times you'll see different people named as the guardians. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, I dare say, you need to retitle the assets in the name of the living trust. Okay? And again, you're the trustee. What does that do? It gives you control over the assets that are in the trust. You retain that control. Okay? But this is a really important point. I've seen bad cases where people went through all the process to get it all done, and they executed it, they signed it, they had a witness, they had it notarized. They never transferred the assets into the name of the trust, so when they passed away, they still had to go, their heirs still had to go through probate. Okay? Don't let that happen. Make sure that if you go through this process and you someday draft and have it executed, the living trust, that you retitle the assets into the name of the living trust. Specifically, the deeds to houses and real estate, which for most of us, that may be our largest asset. Okay? So it's really important that we take care of that. You have to have it re-recorded at the county recorder's office, and the title needs to be put into the name of your trust. But even with savings and investment vehicles, you can name that account into the name of the trust. You can't do it on IRA or 401k or 403b money. That's what's called tax-deferred money or qualified money. You may have heard that referred to as before. But the IRS does not allow us to put pre-tax money into a trust. Okay? But any other after-tax dollars, Roth IRAs can all be put into the name of a trust. Other titleable assets, again, it's somewhat arguable. Some estate planning attorneys would say you should put them in. Others would say there's no need to. Let's be honest, these other titleable assets, automobiles, boats, RVs, motorcycles, you may or may not have those same vehicles at the time that you pass away. In many states, the DMV actually makes allowance for this with a simple form called a transfer upon death. Where you can just name who you'd like that titleable vehicle to go to. So again, others, again, like to put it in the trust. You can do either. But again, deeds to houses and real estate, that one I'm just a stickler on. You need to make sure that gets done. All right. Some frequently asked questions. Let me do that first, and then I'll leave a little bit of time at the end for you to ask some questions if you have any. First one that we sometimes get is the living trust a new idea? And obviously, it's kind of a leading question. You can probably tell that the answer is no, definitely not. The living trust has been around for many centuries. It came here to the U.S. from Great Britain, where kind of our ancestors came from, many of them at least, when it was first founded. And in Great Britain, they've been using living trusts for a long, long time. You can trace it back even to the Roman Empire, where the emperors would actually use the living trusts to transfer on down to the next succeeding emperor, okay? So generation to generation, they could transfer assets on down to the next generation. Second question I hear sometimes, we just talked about the real estate issue and the need to do that. Does that in any way trigger any kind of property tax event? And the answer again is no, it does not. This is a non-saleable transaction when you're retitling it into the name of the trust. Okay, no change of hands between people here. So it does not have any effect on the transfer process of the title. I've heard the question, can I include the distribution of personal items in a trust? Because we often hear about that in a will, but a will actually is part of your trust and it will be incorporated, but you certainly will want to do this, okay? This is the right place to do this. And so even in most of the trust documents, there's a special schedule that you're left to fill out where you can name any non-titleable assets that you would like to go to specific people, okay? In our documents at FBM, it's Schedule C in the addendum, and you can just continue to add to that over time if you have, you know, jewelry or a gun collection, stamp collection, grandma's fine china, and you want that to go to a certain person, you can simply name that right in that schedule. So certainly you'll want to do that. Is it necessary, if I am going to do this with financial planning ministry, is it necessary for me to fully disclose the value of my estate? Well, two things I want to point out here. First, simple answer is yes. We do need to know what the estate values are and what you have as far as resources so we can understand if there are any special needs or provisions that need to be incorporated into that, okay? And a couple in particular, if you have property in different states, okay, then we need to make sure that we put a universal provision in there that allows for those different states where you have real estate. I mentioned special needs, specifically if you have any children who have special needs, not so much relevant to the resources, but that is another area where we would need to know what the situation there was, because in those situations you don't want to risk that person, if they are on any kind of state aid, someday receiving an inheritance because it can throw off the state aid that they receive. So again, just information that we need specifically. We're not trying to be nosy. We just need to know these things. So again, just in case you're bumping up against the federal estate tax, which is going to change probably someday again, it would be good for us to know where you're at so we know what kind of provisions we may want to put in there relative to that. So again, all that to say, we do need to know those things. But the second thing is that I always point out is that we hold confidentiality at a very high regard at Financial Planning Ministry. And so even though we work with almost 100 different ministry sponsors across the country, churches and parachurch ministries, as I mentioned before, we never disclose any personal estate property assets to those partnership sponsors, okay? So that's just between you and us when we're filling it out. If you do perhaps pledge a gift to them, we will let them know about that, but we will not tell them anything about your personal estate because of the confidentiality needs that we do recognize, okay? All right, question, may I make changes in my trust after it's notarized? What do you think? Of course, that's one of the advantages of this type of vehicle is that it allows for those changes. And so yes, a couple things here. First of all, when you get to that point that you've gone through and the document has been drafted, you review it, you're going to sign it and have it witnessed and notarized. But someday there are going to be times that you're going to have changes in your life that will necessitate, or at least I would tell you they will necessitate, that you change and amend or add to your trust, okay? So we do amendments all of the time, okay? We have a whole staff that handles amendments, okay? So you will definitely need to have it amended, and once you've done that, that part at least, that amendment needs to be re-notarized, and then you can just put it back in the front cover of the trust and you're good to go. It supersedes by date what was already in there before, okay? But again, really important that you, and I always make a point of it here just to point out, that this is something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis, okay? Now, it doesn't have to be every month or every year even, but every 3, 4, 5 years, or maybe more often than that, you definitely need to take it out. If it's 2 of you, just review it. If you have a board Friday night, get Chinese and a bottle of wine, and you can look over the No, I'm kidding. That doesn't sound like an exciting evening. But all that to say, you need to review it from time to time because we all know that life changes. And what my life looks like today may look completely different 5, 10 years from now, okay? So make sure you're reviewing that on a regular basis. All right. Does a living trust make sense for a single person? What do you think? Yeah, it certainly could, especially if they don't want to go through the probate process or not have their beneficiaries and heirs go through the probate process, then it certainly can make sense for them. Also, if it's a single parent, they're going to want to make sure they have something in place relative to, again, the guardianship for their children, okay? Or could be even a widow or a widower. As they get older, it would still be applicable for them to have something in place here, such as the living trust. Is it practical for smaller estates? We come back to that issue one last time again here. It certainly could still be practical, but again, we're not saying that it's necessary in all circumstances. We certainly would allow for the fact that a will could be perfectly acceptable if you have smaller assets and perhaps no property, then it could make for a pretty easy transfer of assets upon your passing if you just were to use a will. So again, very practical, but a will could be useful, just as useful in some cases. Does a living trust avoid probate on out-of-state property? I already gave this one away. I mentioned a few minutes ago the fact that if you do have property in multiple states, we can handle that. But we need to know about and we'll ask for the addresses of those properties so that we can make sure that we put the correct provisions in there to reflect the fact that you have out-of-state property or property in multiple states, okay? Does a living trust restrict my rights to my property? Not in any way. Remember, we talked about the fact that you retain full control of your assets by using the revocable living trust. So again, you still have all the rights to your property, and may I point out, all the responsibilities as well, including paying taxes and paying the HOA and all those other fun things, okay? So be aware of that. So if I would like to establish my estate plan, what is the next step? So glad you asked. There are a number of different options. Again, remember, I came here today, I have nothing to sell, all right? I just want to inform you what your options are. First one, you've probably seen advertisements on TV for LegalZoom. There's some other ones now that are out there as well that advertise computer software kits where you can just have them sent to you and you can fill them out, go and have them notarized, and those will work just fine, okay? You can do that. I don't know what the customer service is like, and when you have to do an amendment, I don't know what help they give you, but that certainly is an option. It's very viable. Secondly would be you could go and hire a local professional to draft up your trust for you, okay? And again, that's going to be somewhere between probably $1,500 and $4,000, could be more than that if you have a lot of assets in your estate. I don't think it's any surprise that, again, attorneys who specialize in this, they charge an hourly rate. There's usually perhaps a flat rate for the documents, but then an hourly rate based on the expertise that they're providing. When you need a new amendment added to it, guess what? They're going to have to do something, so it's going to require an hourly rate tied to the amount of work that is involved in that for them. So it definitely is an option, and truth be told, when I first moved to Arizona, I didn't know about financial planning ministry. And so my financial advisor told me one day, you really need a revocable living trust. And I said, okay, who do I see for that? He gave me the name of somebody. I went and had it done. And I will just tell you, it costs somewhere between $1,500 and $4,000, okay? If I would have known that my church actually had that program, I probably would have opted for that instead. So just be aware, these are other options. They certainly can work. Finally, engaging with financial planning ministry, we actually do not require any kind of payment, but we do ask that you consider leaving a charitable donation to one of our ministry partners. Again, I mentioned that we have almost 100, I think, might be a little over 100 different ministry partners around the country, including those like our folks here at Jewish Voice. They are paying to have this service provided to their donors and members. And again, I really believe it to be a huge resource that they're providing, a great service that they are bringing to you at no cost to you. Now, I've heard people say it's free, but I think all of you have been around long enough to know nothing's free, okay? We have people that do the preparation, and we have attorneys and so forth who have to get involved. So there is a cost to it, but that cost is being provided to you at no cost. The only thing we ask is that, as I mentioned earlier, if you've been blessed by certain ministries in your life, this is an opportunity where we're not asking you to write a check right now. You can just leave a gift in your estate so that someday when you pass away, you can still fund ministry. Even though you're gone, you're still funding ministry when you're in eternity. Isn't that cool? I just think, I get excited about that. I think it's a great avenue, and it's a win-win situation for everybody. So again, there's no heavy pressure. We're not prescriptive. We don't tell you a certain amount or a certain percentage that you need to leave. We just ask that you prayerfully consider perhaps including one of our ministry partners as a gift in your estate, okay? You can come back to us and do multiple amendments over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We'll never ask for anything again, okay? We're not asking for anything now relative to a specific dollar amount. We're just asking for you to think about including a ministry partner in your estate, okay? You are going to receive instructions from one of our ministry partners on how you can complete the next step in the process to get this done.